Ben and I got into an argument on the show, and I know this upsets people sometimes when Ben and I do this, but we've been doing this since the company started. It's kind of, we sometimes argued so loudly that the women in the company would get upset and like call you at home, "Are you all right?" and all this stuff. And this is our love language. It's just the way we talk to one another when we're discussing these things. And it's because there's a reason for it. It's because we both have, first of all, we both like to argue. And it's because we both have almost identical views of what reality is. We have slightly different values, but they've actually moved closer together over the years. But we come to our views of what reality is in completely different ways. You know how Ben works. He compiles facts, he looks at polls, he looks at numbers, and he tries to glean what's happening from them. I have a novelist's perception of the culture, and I imbibe the culture, and I understand it, and I see into it, because that's what novelists do. That is the way novelists work. And I can learn as much from reading novels and watching TV as he can find out from reading numbers and polls and looking at policy and things like that. And I think it looks like necromancy to him. He doesn't really, it's kind of startling when I turn out to be right often, which if you go back and look at backstages and see what I say is about to happen, like at a debate or something like that, it's kind of been amazing. It's all from kind of cultural observation. Because of this, Ben and Jeremy have more respect for the GOP of Bush, McCain, and Romney than I have, because I have none. And I have respect for the people. I like the people. And some of the policies were fine. And I supported the better policies. Ben is always saying, well, you supported this at the time. I support the better policy over the worst. You only get two choices. It's always a binary choice. So I support the better one at the time. And sometimes I'm wrong. And sometimes time reveals that my choice was not good, even though it was still the better one. But for me, what we're fighting for is the social imaginary. This is a phrase I only recently learned because it comes from Jean-Paul Sartre, a philosopher I despise. But it's what we sometimes call the culture, but it's so much more of that. I've used kind of more clumsy terms like the intellectual atmosphere and all this stuff, but it's everything that we see. It's everything that we assume to be true. It's everything that we know is an absolute moral fact of life, and sometimes it's wrong. The social imaginary is good when it supports good things in keeping with reality, and good and bad are real things outside of ourselves. This is one of the big mistakes that the leftist philosophers make. They're not inventions of our own. The imaginary is our reflection of something that is outside ourselves. This is the problem they have. They think if they change the social imaginary, reality changes, but only your perception of reality changes. And if your perception is wrong, you have gone off the rails. Bush, McCain, and Romney surrendered to the left's social imaginary. And this is why I don't really care whether they were right about this or wrong about this. Of course it matters. Of course policy matters. This is what politics is all about. But I am looking at the culture, which I know is going to determine the future. It's going to determine the future 20 years from now. It's going to be the reason why a guy like Barack Obama gets elected when he's obviously wrong, because he knew how to embody the social imaginary. That was the only reason why. And even after his policies had failed, even after people had shown they hated his policies by voting every other Democrat in the country out of office, they still reelected him because he embodied the social imaginary of the good. And to me, it is everything. And this is why I opened my mouth and destroyed my Hollywood career, because if you lose the social imaginary, it doesn't matter what elections you win. And the social imaginary determines what you think. It determines how you think about it. It determines how you discuss it, the words you feel you can use. It determines the Overton window. And Bush apologized for both Bushes apologized for being a Reagan-like conservative. The first George Bush by saying he was going to be a kinder, gentler conservative, and the Bush W saying he was going to have compassionate conservatism. And, when we were arguing about this, Ben said, well, that's just affect. No, it's not. It is actually determinate. It shows you where you are in the social imaginary and what you are doing to it, which in this case was accepting it. McCain pandered to the New York Times, which is the author of the leftist social. Mitt Romney stood down rather than running over Obama because he was paralyzed by the social imaginary. And that's why I was the first person at the DailyWire to support Trump, because I understood earlier than other people, that the social imaginary had become a prison for people like us, and we couldn't beat it with policy. We couldn't beat it with votes. We couldn't beat it with tax cuts. We had to beat it by breaking down the walls, and Trump had the boldness to break the prison walls and the sheer courage to take the consequences. And if you don't fight back against that, I'm telling you, the tax cuts, elections, and policy, none of it matters. The policy victories you win can be huge, or huge, as we say, but if you surrender the social imaginary, everything is gone. And, obviously all these things are intertangled. It's not like policy becomes irrelevant. It's not like polls are irrelevant. It's simply a different way of understanding the world, and it's an important way because it moves everything in the future. And conservatives are bad about talking about it because they're always in a panic about the next election. I'm not a political person. I said this is not a political thing. It's a cultural thing, and it's not about making more movies like Star Wars or whatever. It's not about this movie or that. It's about whether you can think and believe and say what you see with your own eyes and what you know with your heart to be the truth, instead of what they are telling you is true and what they believe to be the truth. And The View and Morning Joe and CNN, they want to censor us because we've taken away from them the monopoly on the imagination. That is what they're fighting for. They don't know it, but I know it, and I'm telling you, now you know it. It's the imagination. And we are winning. This election shows that we are winning that fight. And conservatives always like to be afraid. They enjoy being afraid and saying, if we do this, it won't matter because they'll do that. Well, yes, that's always going to go on. But how do I know that we're winning? How do I know that this is going to be in the future? It's because it's the men. It's the men who are leading the way. Now, the left says, it's just men. They're misogynists. But you know how that nice Andrew Klavan is always trying to tell you that the future is always male? There's a reason for this. I don't say it because I dislike women. Obviously, the opposite is true. Women create the future, but men are the future. Men make the future. And you can always tell where the future is going to be, even if it's lousy, by where the men are. And I'll tell you something else that the social imaginary has hidden from us and has taken away from us, and it is the truth that it is shrouded in a lie. And the left doesn't realize this. Men and women are one flesh. They are meant to be one flesh. That's why that Kamala ad in which the wives lied to their husband about who they voted for, that's why that was so offensive, because it said that their politics, their vote, their power, their social imaginary was more important than the reality that social imaginary is supposed to reflect, that men and women are one flesh. We are not enemies. We're not here to abuse. The men are not here. This is why I'm always at Andrew Tate, and why I get so annoyed when people write to me and say, he says some good things. Andrew Tate says no good things, 0% good things from Andrew Tate. We are not here to abuse our women. We're not here to use their traits in order to dominate and control them or pimp them or hurt them or make it so their selves are just a shadow of what they should be. Men and women are not enemies, and we are not friends. We are husbands and wives. We are one flesh that makes a new world. And that's the very core of every society. You know that ad, every kiss begins with K? Well, every myth begins with Mr. and Mrs. It begins with Adam and Eve. It begins with the first woman and the first man, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. And that's what society is or should be based on. And so men are seeing a new imaginary. They recognize it faster because they are more in tune with the future than women generally are, because women have more important things to do than what men are doing. They saw that the new imaginary from Trump was in keeping with reality, the reality that was already in their heart, that they had been beaten into being afraid of saying. He said it for them. That makes, because it's in keeping with reality and with moral reality, that new imaginary is benevolent, and women will follow. Women will follow, not because they're handmaids, but because we are one flesh, and men have a talent for doing this. They go to the next big thing. When movies become irrelevant, women start directing movies, men are already playing video games. When video games are taken over by women, you will know that men are somewhere else, and that is where the next thing is going to be. It's their job. It's the men's job to lead the way, but we're one flesh. We don't drag the women after us. We go together because we are one flesh. We have all these sayings on the right. We've got to take back the culture, and politics is downstream from culture. And, the old ones like from the poet Shelley, poets of the unacknowledged, legislators of the world, from James Joyce, the author, forges the uncreated conscience of the race. And it's true, a political movement that does not support the arts will die, but the way all of us live are part of that. I'm an artist. I want to leave a vision that remains when I'm gone. But that's what being a parent is too. That's what being a mom is too. It's creating the future. And the social imaginary is how that happens in the bigger society. The old GOP was swept away because they conceded to the left, and they needed to be swept away. And Bush and McCain and Romney, again, not bad people, not necessarily all their ideas or policies were bad, but they screwed that part up. And on that, everything else depends. And what's kind of sweet that Ben and Jeremy don't notice this is because they're so much a part of it. Their brilliance in building this company and succeeding at breaking through all the things that came against us is just a part of what is happening. You know, the last text I got on election night was from my wife, who I had sent somewhere else because I was afraid there might be some violence and I didn't want to leave her alone while there was violence while I was in Nashville. And she sent me this text that said, Donald Trump has been reelected and you helped, and now I'm going to sleep, she said. And when she says that I helped, you know, my wife kind of likes me and she thinks that I'm the only person who works at the Daily Wire. But I think she meant all the people. And I'm thrilled to have been a part of this. But this is a victory. We have taken a piece of the high ground. Is the fight over? It'll never be over. But this is a big, big victory. And when you win the social imaginary, you win the future. Thanks for watching. For more great content, like and subscribe. And do not forget to subscribe to The Andrew Klavan Show wherever you get your podcasts.